So, in the last lesson, we were discussing ecosophy, and ecosophy itself is an attitude to nature, and he, as he calls it, his own attitude or his own created ecosophical system, which is ecosophy T. He talks about his love for the mountains, his experience of nature revolves a lot around his experience in the mountains. So, they are attitudes to nature. Let's look at them. He says, throughout history, Norway has prided itself in its attitudes to sea, mountain, and forest. He says natural beauty is prized in Norway, and this has been so throughout history. He says the housing in Norway is not only based on protection from extreme weather but also affords beautiful views of nature. The English word nature in comparison to natur in Norwegian is not as layered and multidimensional. In Norwegian culture, it refers to unprocessed in comparison to nature that is processed or beautified. So we have trimmed and beautified gardens. That is something he called processed and beautified. While he's talking about wildlife and wild nature, and Norwegian culture values wild nature and biodiversity in the forest a lot. It signifies untouched nature, and such untouched and secret places are found, for instance, in the mountains in India and China. He finds in his own connections with nature his own identification with Hallingskarvet, the mountain chain in Norway. And he feels that the mountains have a dignity of their own. And everyone there in Norway has special feelings for nature. And he describes those special feelings thus, and he talks how Norwegians see life and death as connected with nature. It is a common Norwegian idea that one goes into nature rather than out to nature. One wants to find oneself, have time to think, better understand what really wants. Some want to die a dignified death in nature. Every day, life is often strongly uh, uh, ridden by external pressures from different directions, not infrequently clashing with one another. So, life is burdened by numerous concerns, by external pressures of the outside world, and in this way, everyday life makes people beside themselves. So, people get very depressed or pressured or unhappy or tense. They suffer from stress because of everyday life. So, as a result of this, there may arise a longing for surroundings where one may have a cleaner feeling of a feeling of what one really is or of who one really is. So, people have this longing in their hearts to find a clean place where they can see themselves more clearly and where they can realize their true identity. And here come the words self realization or realizing the ecological self with great depth and breadth. So, this paragraph was taken from Life's Philosophy, Reason and Feeling in a Deeper World. So, you can see that what he has imbibed from his country and his culture is a love for nature, and it through this love he has nurtured the ideas of interconnectedness of nature, and he has given various examples of this love for nature. He mentions an event which sort of fits in with the higher ideals of deep ecology, which we'll discuss later. What is the role of mountains in various cultures? What does he say about mountains in various cultures? In Norway, he says, people don't have religious rituals about worshipping mountains, but the words used for mountains express worship. So, a mountain is a very special living entity. It is not, as maybe scientists or people who are whose selves or understanding is closed might say they are just heaps of rock and mud. Mountains are sacred in cultures. They have a grandeur and a dignity. And in India, Himalayas are revered in various forms, in patriotic songs also, and in religion too. They are the guardians of the country. They guarded the country for centuries against the enemy. And they also have a religious significance. A lot of pilgrimages are undertaken to the Himalayas. He mentions how mountains are sacred in Hinduism. He refers to the story of Nal and Damayanti and their separation as mentioned in the Mahabharata. Now, Damayanti prayed to the mountains to help her find Nal, and she addresses them as her daughter. So, he gives the example of this legend from Mahabharata to show how mountains are worshipped, mountains are living entities, God is found in the mountains. Even in Abrahamic religions, Moses went to the mountains, and other saints also went to the mountains. So, mountains have a sacred quality about them. According to Ecosophy, humans do not have the right to reduce the richness and diversity of the earth unless it is out of a fundamental or vital need. And this applies to mountains too. And when one sort of admires nature, cares for it, supports it, and nurtures it, then certain people might say that human beings are being neglected. Humans are starving, humans are suffering in poverty, and you are concerned about the forest or you are concerned about the mountains. But he uses this maxim: extended care for non human beings, deepened care for human beings. So, since we are all living on the same planet, the more we care about the non human and about the forest and the natural environments, the more we will care about ourselves. The first and foremost is that all living beings have intrinsic value. We cannot put value on non-human beings or on the environment based on its use. It has intrinsic value. It has value of its own, to be admired, to be thought beautiful, to make us feel inspired by it, but it should not be valued in terms of its usefulness. In the same way, as non-human beings have an intrinsic value, the diversity and richness of life has intrinsic value. So, all the plants and the trees and the flora and fauna, all the diversity that is there on the planet, it has intrinsic value. It should not be seen through the lens of business or as a commodity. So, so man does not have the right to destroy the riches of the earth except out of need. Few human beings would be better for the environment. So, this he stresses again and again. Overpopulation is one reason which is putting pressure on natural resources. So, fewer human beings would be better for the environment. Today's life has become extremely unsustainable. So, we can just look at the way we live, the way we move. Forests are cut down to make roads for us, and there are vehicles that run on non-renewable energy. The food that we eat, that also involves the use of non-renewable energy, and it is food that is processed, that is industrialized. So in every sense, what we wear, what we eat, um, where we live, it all gives examples and proof of unsustainable living. And proper progress, proper improvement, proper change requires social, economic, technological, and ideological changes. So, climate change is not something that can be changed overnight. Something has to change in the mindsets which create a certain idea in society, a certain way of behavior, or there are certain mores, established mores in society. So, until and unless those social attitudes, the economic divides, the over dependence on technology, and ideology, which dictates the destruction of nature, until these things are changed, change cannot be brought about. And what exactly is ideological change? That is also an important point in deep ecology, that we must seek a quality of life more than a standard of living. So when one is obsessed with a high standard of living, then one does absolute and um, uh, extreme harm to the environment. So all the houses that require artificial conditioning and artificial ventilation, and a lot of fancy flooring, and use of harmful paints and sprays, all these things, they are about a high standard of living. Whereas quality of life means where one is rich within the balance with nature, when one feels one's needs are limited, because nature completes the personality. When a personality is incomplete or immature, there is a yearning for a lot of material things. But when one's personality is complete and when it is whole, then one realizes the uselessness of these extra things which are forced on us by industry and by commerce and the marketplace today. So, points like these have been raised by American philosophers too. That the idea that the production of things through technology is booming. There is excess production, and that's why there's so much of waste in the West. So the emphasis comes on consuming. The consumer should take everything and should consume. So this is a kind of ideology, and this is about giving people a high standard of living, which is not suitable for the environment. Quality of life is suitable for the environment. To live a good quality of life should involve physical, emotional, psychological, total health. But when there's a high standard of living, those basics are ignored, then necessarily it may not be a healthy life, or it may not be something in which one is in tune with one's real self, which is the most important thing about deep ecology, which is realizing the ecological self, being deeply in tune with one's own personality and self. And finally, he says, if you accept these points, then you are responsible for bringing about change directly or indirectly. Now, he is also influenced by psychologists Erich Fromm and Sigmund Freud. He talks about self-love. What do these psychologists say about self-love? He quotes, love for others and love for ourselves are not alternatives. Like if you say, either you can love someone else, other people, or you can love yourself. They are not alternatives. On the contrary, an attitude of love towards themselves we find in all those who are capable of loving others. These are not two opposites. The capability of loving oneself will be found in all those who are capable of loving others. So, contrary to this thing, saying that self-love is opposite to loving others, it is not so. They are connected with each other. Genuine love is an expression of productiveness and implies care, respect, responsibility, and knowledge. So these are the things of real, genuine love: care, respect, responsibility, and knowledge. So if these things are there in the mindset, if one can reach the sense of self-realization and realize that these are the things that matter most, and not abundance of money gained by cutting down trees or removing forest. What is important in life and important to save the planet is care, respect, responsibility, and knowledge. Thus, according to Næss, the highest love is to strive for the happiness and growth of the person one loves. So, in doing that, one also contributes to the development of one's personality, to the enrichment of one's personality. Not doing this is a closed self, which is stagnating, in which there is no progress and no evolvement. He does not see unselfishness as opposite of selfishness. Rather, he finds unselfishness or being self-sacrificing as unacceptable. He feels that being unselfish or self-sacrificing is unacceptable, and he gives the reasons. He gives the example of a mother who is self-sacrificing, who has sacrificed her desires and aspirations for the sake of her children. This has a negative impact on the children because it produces a sense of guilt and insecurity in them. On the other hand, a mother who loves herself and who has fulfilled her desires, who has completed her personality, who connects with everyone, with life and the living force, her children will be happy and secure. So, self-sacrificing is to deny life itself, as he says. He strongly believes that self-love and regard is equivalent to self-realization. Thus, caring for oneself leads to caring for others. And he uses the maxim, everything hangs together. This means that the realized self is connected to other living beings, ecosystems, and ecosphere, and the earth with its long history. So, the living self, the self that is realized, the self that is alive, that self is connected with other living beings, with ecosystems, the ecosphere, and with the earth in its long history, its long background. So, he gives the basic tenets of deep ecology by telling us that there is an interconnectedness between all living things, human and non human, and one needs to develop that connection, one needs to build that connection uh, because it creates happiness, it creates satisfaction, and it develops the self. It develops the ecological self. Anybody not doing that, anybody who is not connected, who only lives in a closed world, then progress is shut out. His personality stagnates. So there are so many examples, very simple examples that are there in newspapers and everyday events. Children are mentally and physically healthier who have grown up in open environments, who can connect with the trees and who can connect with animals and birds. There are also extreme examples of crime, of psychopaths. They are the ones who cannot connect with anyone. They are the ones who are closed and the personality has stagnated. So, this kind of stagnation or this kind of separation from the environment and from nature leads to all kinds of problems. And I mentioned in one of the lessons earlier also, we talked about C.G. Jung, the German psychologist, who talked about wholeness in the same way that Arne Næss talks about the interconnectedness of all living beings. So, uh, Jung says that the more we move away from nature, the more we move away from our complete selves and we become incomplete. So, going according to nature, living with its patterns, with a part of us. When we talk about nature, it's the external nature, but it is also the nature within us, in our minds, in the construction of our bodies, in the chemicals that make us up. We are part of that nature. So it's something that is impossible to deny. And if it is denied, if there is a gap, then all kinds of problems come in. Then there are psychological problems as well as physical illnesses. So he gives the example of Norway in order to define the ecological self. He mentions the importance of place, why we call it ecological self, the attachment of the self to an ecology, to an environment that creates the ecological self. So he gives the example from his experiences in Norway. He mentions how the livelihoods of Norwegian fishermen were threatened by fishing trawlers and heavy industries in the 1980s. So, what happened was that there was protest also, and there were wide-ranging economic problems for these people. So, the government decided to do something about it and sort of displace these people, put them in special centers. So, what happened? As a result, the ecological self got splintered when the government relocated them to centers to resolve their problems. These relocated fishermen felt that their self was split when they were separated from their ecosystem. So, this is how it defines ecological self, that we have an innate bond. Our self is part of ecology and we cannot separate it. If we separate it, it leads to dire consequences. So, what is happening today is we have forgotten that ecological self in our overindulgence of using technology and in overindulgence in consumerism. We have forgotten the beauty of life. We have forgotten the beauty of nature. So, on any level that you think, the food that we eat, the holidays or the entertainment, everything is kind of artificial. And we have lost the sense of the quiet in nature, which gives us peace, which gives us health, which restores our balance and restores our health. So, that is called the ecological self. So, in all his writing, he stresses on the interconnectedness of the universe and that human beings are very much part of that, and plundering that connectivity, trying to shatter that connectivity, brings very unhappy consequences. So, our livelihoods, the way we lead our lives, all that is an example of how nature has been pushed into the background, and industry and consumerism and commercialism is in the forefront. So, for example, Vandana Shiva, we read an essay by her that was Annadana, on food. How can the food be nourishing when it is not coming directly from nature, when it has been altered by industry through processing, through excess processing? And that processing is also not a simple formula. That also has the capitalist idea of maximum benefit. So think about a simple nut like an almond, and then somebody tells you that almonds, or even literature tells you almonds are good for your health. But the almond which has passed through the industry will be shorn of its natural oils and then it will be delivered to you. So it's very difficult these days in the market to find pure oils. If you think of olive oil or you think of other oils, it is all impure, it is all adulterated. So, industry and processing removes the nutrients, makes it unhealthy, and actually the chain of supply that came directly from nature, that has been destroyed. So, we are dependent on industry for our livelihood and for our survival. So that's why I quoted Vandana Shiva's essay. So let's stop here today. We will continue next time. I hope you found these ideas of Arne Næss workable and interesting. We'll continue with this next time. Thank you.